There's three things I want to talk about. The first one was, it says, okay, I will transfer capital from my world to yours. Goodbye. This is a donation. I can make a big story out of that. You can feel beholden. You can do all the things you like. But basically, it's a clinical operation on my part, and it's done. And this is how a donation happens. This is not necessarily gift money. It now depends what you do in your balance sheet with this money. Because if you just put it back in the markets, nothing is accomplished. So, so it's not enough just for me to move it over from my world to yours. If you put it back in the bank that I just took it out of.
Yeah.
So we need to look at what you're doing. And now we come into the balance sheet, mine or yours, doesn't matter. And here we have this instrument where we can see, okay, so what is it on the asset side? I've claimed I need all these things to create products for you, not for me. So I need this means of production. And here they all are. And here's the cost of them. Here's how they're financed. This is clinical. If you're a baker, the example I always give, if you're a baker, you've decided you can bake, I don't know, 400 loaves a day, every day without fail, and be in the shop by 9 o'clock if you're a baker, right? Meaning you've got to get up at 4 o'clock every day without fail, and then create your 400 if you're a baker. But if you have 400, then you're going to have a certain size oven, no bigger, no less, a certain amount of wheat, no more, your claim, your skill set that you claim will determine the size of your bakery. And this is clinical, by which I mean it is given by however many loaves of bread you think you're going to make. Get a bigger oven than this, you have an inefficiency. The smaller oven, you have an inefficiency. So you can read the assets in any business, and you can see, are these true to what's going on in that business? It's very difficult to variabilize assets, but ideally your assets should just be like living-stone daisies. When the sun shines, they open up, and when it goes away, they shut. This is not so easy to do, obviously. But ideally, your assets will be variabilized according to whether they're being used or not. And then likewise, your finance will do the same thing. You will shed borrowed capital or attract it according to what's going on. It's kind of a strange image, but if you have this image, you can then see how much capital is needed in your actual business, how much you can then lend out, and it won't impact on your business. You're really running two businesses.
Yeah.
And now when you come into here, you can do a lot without giving any money away, without any transfers. One thing you can do, if you have excess cash, you can just provide liquidity to someone for a minute, for an hour, for a day, for a week, for a year, whatever. Kind of banks, watch out, because when we start doing this, nobody needs banks, because I don't need to charge you for my liquidity. I can make an argument that if you've got it, I haven't. I can make all sorts of arguments to sort of, but I don't need to put the interest that high. Really, I can put it low. Yeah. That's the simplest thing. I can provide you with a cheap overdraft, or I can lend to you short term. Or I could say, okay, pay next month. Just keep your payables, right? I just keep my receivables for another month. There's lots of things you can do on the balance sheet where you are capitalized that you need to be capitalized. I might be saying, make sure you open up your shop on time next time. I might be making conditions on why you don't have liquidity and why I'm offering it to you. So I'm not being blind about this. But then I could lend you from my balance sheet. Actually, you can have it for 5 years at 2%, and that's it. See you in 5 years. And I'll send the lawyers in if you don't do it right, or whatever. You can start lending, or I might buy shares. And now if I buy shares, if I lend you money, I lend you 5,000 at X% for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, I get 5,000 back plus the interest. That's it. And now I've got a problem. The purchasing power parity of that's gone down, so I've given you a bit of money. If I invest 5,000, I get whatever's left over pro rata. And this is a kind of loan. I'm not saying it's a kind of loan, but it's not a loan. It's an investment. And with that comes a lot of other things. Normally on a balance sheet, in the West at least, you have the liability side is made up of debt and equity. Debt meaning loans, like I'm saying, that it's 5,000, it's fixed. But the equity is not fixed. It can disappear entirely, of course, but it can go up. So at the end of the 3 years, I get the dividend from that period of time, which may be more or less than the interest. It's a type of interest, but the principal may be smaller or larger. Here it's the same, regardless. So, so that's a huge difference. And why it's there is this capital is carrying the risk of the business. It's matching the risk. This capital from the bank is not linked to the risk. And once you link money from a bank to your risk, you're in trouble because the bank can take you over, rightly. You know, if you're running risk, you should be able to calculate the risk you're running and therefore the amount of investment you need, share money. It's a whole other question whether the share, the legal form of the share gives the investor rights over you. That's a whole other discussion. I don't really want to go into that because we don't have time. But we're still in the area of loan money. There's the kind of loan where the principal is fixed, independent, you know, whatever's going on, it's going to be like this. It's not so it belongs to a certain kind of financing if you want to do this. But risk is like a you know, a helter-skelter, right? And it can't be financed by fixed lumps of money. This is just crazy. It's just a mismatch. So you have to get that really clear. And then you have a kind of capital, a kind of loan in your balance sheet, which is ready to be flexible, ready to go with the whatever. It will leave this unimpacted necessarily. So you have to know what this is. And there the return, the interest I get on this kind of loan will take the form of dividends, meaning when I make a loan, the repayment of the loan and the payment of the interest is above the line. It has to happen regardless of the circumstance of my business. For shares and for dividends, I only get the dividend if there's a dividend declared, meaning the people running the business, first they have to make sure so that they've made a profit. Then they have to make sure they can release the cash from the business for cash flow purposes. And only then can they can declare and pay a dividend. They can declare it, but they can just put it on my account. If they want me to actually pay it out to me, they have to be sure that the cash flow consequence of this doesn't ruin the business. So it's a very different thing to you know, they pay the interest regardless of their circumstances, regardless of the cash flow consequences. But the cash flow consequences down here are kind of overrule everything. And so you end up in this world where I'm not leaving aside the ownership issues. I don't want to get into that right now. The type of investment is I'm lending you money which is ready for the fun, you know, for the journey. It's going to be very bumpy and very flexible. And the return on my loan will be, you know, the dividend, it will be as flexible as the whole thing. And it's going to be like a share in whatever's left over, pro rata. I'm taking the risk with you. That's why, in my view, it's called equity, because, you know, we have to agree you're incurring the risk and I'm financing your risk. So you know, I'm not going to do that blind. We're going to have some sort of conversation here about how that works out. I totally understand this. But it's still a kind of loan. And this is where, in my view, if you want to manage an economy or keep this balance clear, you can do far more through the balance sheet than you can through it. You know, if you make a donation, you really have said, I absolutely do not need this capital in my world whatsoever. And so I just remove it from my world clinically. Every day you can just identify it. So that's gone. And someone else can have this problem, the same problem I have of balance, you know, but I've given him the money to do that. But I still have my active balance sheet. And there's lots of things I've just tried to describe that I can do with my balance sheet to manage with the rest of the world this balance, to make sure that that we're all optimally capitalized.
Yeah.
And an important consideration there is, when I say optimally capitalized, it's optimal if you have the debt equity ratio. It's not the ratio. You need to know how much risk are you running, are you generating as an entrepreneur. This cannot be financed by fixed loans. It's just not possible. And the only person who can know the risks they're running is the person who's running them. Then you need to find partners, say, okay, we'll join you on that journey. We're not joining you on this journey. There are people who will lend, for their savings, their life savings. They can't put that down here. They will put it up there. But there are equally people who will put money down here and they don't want to put it up there. They're not interested in this static world. So you are led out to your kind of the karmic crowd that's trying to fund you, strictly speaking, with a certain. Now you can characterize that world. You can say, so I'm looking for a certain kind of people, and this. I think this is enough to say that for me, when people say, as some do, that loan money equals loans, I say not really, or not only, because you have a very narrow image of loan when you say that. You're not saying mutually provided overdrafts, liquidity sharing, investment loans. You're not saying anything I'm saying, right? And so I just want to make that clear, because once we are clear generally that these two things need balancing, there's a huge amount we can do to do that.
And here it's a simple example in a way, because it's directly invested, and we could see in the balance sheet of the entrepreneur how it's expressed. Can you say a word about all this secondary market of shares, where the company, the balance sheet of the company doesn't seize, if I understand correctly, it doesn't see this the money once I buy it with my excess, the shares of Facebook, for example. It's not like Facebook is now seeing in its balance sheet my money, right, in its debt or equity.
Well, I would just, we can touch on it briefly, but only briefly, because when you get into the primary, secondary markets of anything, or the primary and secondary stages, it is linked somehow to the ownership problem. So I just want to say very briefly, you don't have to, normally what happens with shares, you get ownership. They say ownership of the business. I say no one owns a business. You get ownership of whatever's left over in the business, but nobody owns a business. This is really important. It has no ownership as such. You can own shares in a business, and if you have the control, or you have all the shares, you might say to yourself, actually, I own a business. And I say, no, you don't. No way. Nobody owns a business. Get that really clear. It has, if anything, it's really important. Nobody owns a business. It's not technically possible. And so you can own the control of the business. You can own all the shares in the business, and that gives you rights to it. But now these rights, they don't have to be used you can differentiate between the right to a dividend, let's say, and the right to conduct a business. You don't have to have both rights. You choose to have them. You don't have to. So this is a big topic, but you could just differentiate. Okay, so here's a $10,000, and I have a right to the dividend. But good luck. Let me know when I don't have to turn up at the AGM and tell you how to run this business. This is not necessary. I can choose to do this, and most people think that's what you have to do, but not in fact. You could trust entirely to the entrepreneur. This is a very complex discussion, which I won't go into now. But once you've got that clear, then the problem of the secondary markets is very different, because in a primary market, if I stay with the investment idea, is when you first, like an IPO, when you first start a business, you figured out what it's going to be, and you need, I put it in a certain sense, you need all these physical assets, and they did certain, and at a certain today's price, and that would tell you how much finance you need. And as long as the finance is rightly organized, the right amount of loan against equity, or the terms and all the rest of it are a match for what you're doing, that is the primary market. People come in because you've asked them to finance that. That's the primary market. And leave aside the distortion of rights, of leave aside, I'm coming in to tell you what to do. I'm just coming in to be your partner in this operation because you've got the insights and I've got the capital. And unless my capital is linked to some insight, it dies a death. So I'm not going to tell you what insight to have. That would be stupid. So once one's clear about this, then you can say, so I came in for this. But of course, as things go along, this financial sort of shadow, it's not the word, the fact that this surplus is being created will result in every business is also a little merchant bank by definition. Every business is also a merchant bank. It's got cash flow it can lend out. You can give credit cards against its own cash flow. Nothing to do with banks. And when one understands this, then you have to kind of put on your merchant bank hat, if you see what I'm trying to say. And so you then have the primary market is paid for, is financing all your original building, your original equipment, if I keep it physical. The secondary market is saying, okay, it's me saying, look, I've got this investment in this business. From my point of view, I'm locked into, and as long as that business, as long as the factory and the machines are what he says they're worth, and if on liquidation it's all true, then that's the cover for my investment. But actually, I'd like out of this situation, or I'm dying, I need my money back. So would you like to buy my paper? That's the secondary market, right? And now, leave aside all the ownership points I'm saying earlier, because we haven't got time to take those out of the equation. If it's just a financing and not a technique, well, I'm going to tell you what to do. It's a simple matter. It's factoring. Okay, I will say, yes, I'll buy your paper at a discount, because there's a kind of issue with what is in the background, and we all want to get away from that problem. And so the further you go out, you're just selling paper, and it's like a futures market. In the end, my hand's gone, I'm way out here. In the background is still the machines in which the whole thing is derived from, right? But actually, when I'm way out here, you can't see where my fingers are, I'm immune from all this. But the minute I forget, it goes back to this, right? I will crash my market. That's what happened in 2008. The minute people think, this is what Steiner said, you can follow from 1810, 1815, the minute from the moment when the money market started to separate from the goods market, they were seeking to emancipate themselves, is his words. The minute they thought they were separate, they crashed, and that's what 2008 was about. That was the very moment the markets thought, we don't need the goods markets in any form whatsoever. At that moment, they just crashed themselves because they are in some kind of link. It can be very, very, very stretched, but at the end, it's got to come back. It's to do with this balancing. In the end, it's got to be affordable by the so-called real economy. And this can be very, very stretched. I'm not knocking it. It's a measure of creativity, how ephemeral the experience economy is huge in today's world relative to the, who's out there digging their own carrots? Nobody. Chopping logs for the heating? Nobody in a Western world. So if you take out the ownership issue, which it's a huge issue, but I'm just assuming it's resolved, all I'm doing is I'm just trying to provide liquidity from my distant rarefied place for the physical world. And that's all the primary market, secondary market, tertiary market, whatever the words are, right? That's all I'm doing. And that's all we're doing, because out there, it will look like a pension fund that you put your money in, because it has bought all these things. So it's bound to happen in this day and age. We're not only living in a monetized world when we're self-centered, but we will end up in a world which is so rarefied. It's just a world of finance. It's hard for me to put it into words, but as I said, way out there, you may not understand what I'm saying, but if you rely on pension funds for your pension, as most people do, right, and you rely on the way they construct it currently, they will have bought all this paper which is way out there. So you're totally linked to this, actually, yeah. Right? Yeah. And it's hard to say, but this level of sophistication, because I think it is quite sophisticated, quite complex. If you have too folksy an understanding of what Steiner's saying, if you think loan money is only loans, or gift money is only gifts, right, in the personal sense of it, you will never come to this level of sophistication, nor will you be able to offer that level of sophistication to the world as it is. Because most of the criticism of modern finance is pretty condemnatory. It's pretty untutored. It's not really knowing. It's pretty condemnatory in the background. You know, not-for-profit tells everything you want to know about not-for-profits. They somehow have the idea that you can exist without profit, as if you could breathe without air. It's just a ridiculous notion. And it's all because they think the profit is the question of whose is it. But for Steiner, that was never the issue. The question is, it's clear who the profit is. It belongs on the balance sheet. The question is, what use is it being put to?
Yeah.
We're not interested in whose it is, because that's an irrelevance. You know, you can own a lot of capital and put it in the wrong place and wipe yourself out. So who owns it is completely irrelevant. What the use? Where is this capital? And as I say, you can then analyze any balance sheet. Okay, this is in your business. We get that. The rest of it is out there in the universe. Are you aware of this? And are you clear what's going on with it? And are you going to follow this story? Because you could, if you could be bothered. You know, but most people say, no, I don't want to. So they're complicit with this whole world, which makes use of their money in ways of which they're completely unconscious, because they choose to be unconscious. They can blame the banks then, or blame whatever. They can start blaming everything, right? But the only way not to do that is to take your money out of the bank and lend it to your neighbor who's struggling. The bank knows he's struggling because he has him as a client. He's not going to tell you this because he knows you will then take your money out of the account and lend it straight. And then that's the end of the banking system. So they have a problem on their hands with any increase. Serious financial literacy means there are no banks in the universe. This is Steiner's point. To end with a kind of unkind comment, he once described bankers as turnips, which I think is a very, a vegetable in the ground. And it's not about bankers as people. It's about, in the whole evolution of banking, it came about as we're becoming more and more conscious. But as we become conscious, it becomes obsolescent. You know, everyone becomes a banker or a central banker or a monetary authority. So it's not I'm not making a negative comment about bankers. What he's really meaning is, in the point in history, we have to be really clear when banking is no longer necessary. Mm-hmm. Because we've put them out of business, and they need to be clear about this, so they don't hang on to banking for historical reasons. That's just wasting everybody's time and money. As I said, in my town, thank God, there's one bank remains on the corner of the street in my town. All the others are shut up. Go back 10 years, they would never close their corner street branches, never, because they would make the argument the psychology of the world cannot cope without banks on every corner. I've had so many bankers tell me this. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep on all this expensive real estate to maintain the psychology. Well, thanks to COVID, they don't say that anymore.